Nice to see each of you here today. This is our fourth week that I've been on the topic of perception. Perception is such a huge, huge topic. It's really one that we experience every day. As soon as we open our eyes, and as soon as we start thinking and feeling and having sensations, we're all filtering it through our perception. And our perception, just to remind us, is how we come about it, is has been shaped and being developed since the day of our birth, and really while we're still in our mother's womb. And our perception is made up of every experience that we've ever had, every encounter and every relationship we've ever had, every piece of knowledge we've ever experienced, taken in, read, been taught, as well as all of our feelings and emotions. And when we wrap it all up and mix it all together in a big bowl, and we kind of drink it down, that develops our perception. Our perception is how we see each other, how we see ourselves, how we see life, how we see God, how we see religion, how we see the BC government. I'll bring it up a little more later. I love that. Talk about an oxymoron. The HST. Harmonized. I'm not sure if they understand that we're in harmony over it yet. Anyway, on to today. Our spirit, as we focus on our spiritual perception, is the spirit is the place of where our intuition, our dreams, visions, and revelations come from. It is where our original ideas and guidance emerge out of. It is where our deepest intimacy in God takes place, through our spiritual connection. It is where direct knowledge emerges from. It is the deepest part of our humanity, the most special and privileged part that we have that exists within our very being. It is that place where we know what we know. Have you ever had that moment where you just know something? Something as marvelous and fantastic and life-transforming that when you have that one coffee with a person and you say, that's the one I'm going to marry, they just don't know it yet. To a simple, but yet as significant as, I need to pause a moment before I get in my car and drive. And pausing that moment or two, for some reason, is what allows you not to go through an intersection where a car would have broadsided you. That's where that knowledge comes from. That place where we know what we know. It is the primary functions of the Spirit. The primary functions of the Spirit are wisdom, perception, and knowledge. Spiritual perception is when we start perceiving our reality outside of ourselves. That's when our spiritual perception is becoming prevalent in our life. When we begin to perceive that there is a life along with our own outside of ourselves. How many of us have become so focused sometimes that we have a hard time comprehending that there's really 6.8 billion other people on earth? Where we just think sometimes it's just me. At the moment that we use our physical perception, which means our sensation of reality is filtered through our selfish, egoistic filters. As we relate everything to ourselves, we live within our own little bubble, judging everything by the sweet-bitter principle. In other words, whether anything feels sweet or bitter for me. Do you spend much time of your life going through each day, each series of events, each encounter that you have going, yeah, that was a sweet one. Oh, that was bitter. That was sweet, bitter. How many are like this in every conversation? Sweet, bitter, sweet, bitter, sweet, bitter. And where do we do with that perceived perception of we've had a bitter encounter? What do we do with our bitter experiences, our bitter perceptions? Do we stay away from those bitter perceptions, or do we ever shift our perception to move those bitter perceptions into a sweet perception? How about ourselves? When you look yourself in the mirror, as I say often in here, because I'm a big believer in what is our perception of self, because our perception of self goes so long in determining, so far in determining our perception of others. When you look in that mirror, is it a sweet sight you see or a bitter sight? Or is it a mixture? Sweet or bitter? Bitter or sweet? As human beings, through our eyesight, we have the ability to have stereo vision, which is one of the more fascinating human abilities that we have. Our eyeballs actually capture things in 2D snapshots of our environment, and our brains and visual circuitry rapidly combine them into 3D images. Isn't that awesome? It's like the original, it's like you got those 3D glasses inside of your brain. It's not outside here, because we only see each other in 2D images, just like a snapshot. But it's the brain that is able to develop that 3D image. So even though our eyes are perceiving reality in 2 dimensions, by combining the data from both eyes in a specific way, we perceive our visual fields in apparent 3D. Isn't that awesome? And it does it instantaneously. This 3D image is richer than either of its 2D components. You could also say it's a more useful representation of reality than the raw pre-processed data taken in by our own eyes. The combined input of all 5 of our physical senses and their submodalities creates a rich and cohesive whole. For example, when you go out to dinner with friends, the sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and textures of your evening create an experience that's greater than the sum of any individual part of that evening. Spiritually, we also have the same set, a rich set of inputs. Unfortunately, most of us are taught to give our attention to a puny subset of those inputs and tune out the rest as irrelevant or misleading. The spiritual blindness can't help but create functional problems for us. Such problems manifest in many forms, such as depression, loneliness, hopelessness, and meaningless. We do our best to adapt and do without, but for most of us, this is an unnecessary handicap. Just as your physical senses act as lenses through which you perceive different subsets of reality, your spiritual senses also act as a cognitive filtering mechanism. These filters allow you to focus on bits and pieces of pre-processed information that may or may not be useful to you. The spiritual sensory data that you can access and comprehend, the richer your spiritual life will be, the more accurately it will model truth. Now that I've bored you all to death, it's important to set up that concept of how we see things and how we filter things out. Because what we've learned to do magnificently is focus out our spiritual perception, where we question ourselves continuously. Wow, is that really the way it is? Wow, am I really a part of God? How many have taken that simple statement of, I am one with all of life, and as it filters through our spiritual perception, it comes out, no, you're not, we're separate. We're separate individuals here on earth operating totally separate from each other. Not as connected. How many times has your intuition spoken to you and you had that great idea, that marvelous revelation has come through you, and you go, no, that's not so. We filter out our spiritual perception of who we are continuously. Our filter of our spiritual perception is continuously at work. When we saw those pictures of the physically challenged people walking on their hands, crawling without any legs, fixing their bicycle tires with their toes, how often do we look at someone like that and go, oh, poor person? Instead of, wow, what a magnificent and unique expression of God coming through that human being in a powerful way. That's how we filter our spiritual perception. When we look at each other, do we look at each other and go, wow, that is a divine expression of God? Or do we say, wow, that person is less than? They're critical, they're this, they're that, they're this, 100 different ways. That's the filtering of our spiritual perception. When we allow our mind, our spirit, to see each other in a 3D dimension and see the whole person, not just a little bit of them, but the whole person, we can then recognize how magnificent we really are as these creatures walking around here on this thing called Earth. Have you ever wondered how many grains of sand there are on our beaches in this world? I have a lot of times.